What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I'm feeling like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Bob Froese of Bob's Your Uncle. And Bob, before I formally introduce you, I always like to point out other episodes people should check out of the podcast. Since this is part of the Top Agency series, I had Adee Clevitt on the podcast. She actually helps, she's an easy button for a company to produce SOPs and operational materials. So it helps with onboarding of staff, onboarding with clients. And we geeked out on our favorite productivity tools and much more. So check that episode out. Also, I had Todd Taskey, and Todd Taskey basically helps pair private equity with agencies. He's helped sell agencies, and he's got the Second Bite podcast. He's found that sometimes people make more on the second bite than they do on the first because of when they're working with private equity anyways, and talked about the agency landscape and valuations and much more. So that's an interesting episode, and check out more on inspiredinsider.com. This episode is brought to you by Rise 25. Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their dream relationships. And how do we do that? We actually do that by helping you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do the accountability, the strategy, and the full execution. And Bob, we call ourselves the magic elves that run in the background that make it look easy for the host and the company so they can develop great content, great relationships, and run their business. So the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. And I found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I most admire and share with the world what they're working on. So if you've thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, go to rise25.com to learn more. And I'm excited to introduce Bob Froese. He's founder of Bob's Your Uncle. It's the agency that's launched category giants. It's hijacked the Olympics, which we will hopefully talk about, and once closed down Miami streets to shoot a major fashion campaign. He founded his agency 20 plus years ago, having never been exposed actually to TV, radio, or movies. He grew up as a Mennonite in rural Manitoba, which is super interesting. And they work with such clients as Popeyes Chicken, Canon, Bosch, Mike's Hard Lemonade, and many, many more. And Bob, thanks for joining me.
You're welcome. Nice to be here, Jeremy.
So just start us off and talk about Bob's Your Uncle and what you do.
Sure. We're, I guess at heart, we would define ourselves as a creative agency. We exist to help clients find, more meaningful ways to connect with their consumers. We sort of go hard on this idea of who cares. The insight being, I think most of us, most people, most brands certainly think they have a lot more care and concern and attention from their consumers than they actually do. And I think that's our ingoing starting point is, what? No one cares about us. No one cares about your brand. Well, some people do. So let's go find them and let's find out why. And then let's make that meaningful for other people. So that's the simple story.
Talk a little about the role of branding and the power of creativity, because that's baked into what you do.
Yeah. So I think, it is what we do for sure. So clearly we believe in it. And, there's no shortage of evidence out there that creativity works. In creativity, when it comes to brands talking to people, for us is based on three things: the power of emotion. Without emotion, you're flat, and nobody has reason to pay attention to you or feel anything about you. It's a famous poet, Maya Angelou, said, "People won't remember what you said, but they will remember how you made them feel." And I think that's just sort of at our heart when we think about emotion. And secondly, relevance. There's no shortage of brands and products screaming at everybody for attention and with messaging, but so much of that is not for the right people, for the right time, for what they're looking for whatever. And the third is difference. I think this is actually the hardest one for a lot of brands because there's so many similar products out there. There's so much similar advertising out there, and we believe fundamentally your advertising has to be different than other people's. Otherwise, why are people going to pay more for you? Why are they even going to listen to you? I already got what you're selling me. Work hard, find something different about your product. And when that's not the case, find a different way to connect with people about your brand.
You ate your own dog food, right? And you actually rebranded the company. It wasn't always Bob's Your Uncle. Talk about the rebrand.
Yeah, so we were a company called the Brainstorm Group before, and that was my partner's vision for a company that had a very collaborative style with clients, right? Brainstorm sessions. We don't necessarily well, we're very collaborative. I never believe that's necessarily the best way to get to the best work. So I was always waiting for the opportunity to do something better. And the problem with the Brainstorm Group as a name, or the challenge, not a problem, is that everybody said they knew us. If I say, "Oh, I'm with the Brainstorm Group," they're like, "Yeah, I think I've heard of you." I'm like, "You haven't. It just sounds familiar." So we're looking for an idea, and Bob's Your Uncle was proposed by some of our young creative guys, which really caught me off guard because it was, it's an old expression. We went through our own rebranding journey, a journey we've guided, 100+ times for clients, very confidently, very adeptly, marching through all the steps, conviction in our recommendations. But man, when it came to being the client of our own advice, that's one of the most challenging exercises we've ever gone through. And I'm not sure I was a good client. I was like, yeah, I don't like that. I don't like that.
You're like, we don't want you as a client, but
yeah,
we can't.
So they were like I was with clients. They were with me, and they stuck to it. And they said, you know what, sit with this for a bit. Don't say no. And I thought it through, and we went with it. And it was a bit of a brave step on one hand, because in Canada and the UK and the Commonwealth, that's a very well-known and well-loved expression. Bob's Your Uncle means everything's sorted out. You're good to go. Things turn out as they're supposed to. In America, which was half of our business, nobody other than a handful of Brits have ever heard that expression, right? So my American clients were like, "What are you doing?" They didn't know us as that. But it was fun. Ultimately, it's an insanely likable name. People enjoy it. We have a lot of U.S. clients that have never heard of it, that still love it. And my standard for it was, will people like it? Will they remember it? That's all we need. That's all that matters. Like, that's our brand. And I'll tell you what, people love it and they remember it. And we've done well by the rebrand. So it's given us, heart and confidence for when we bringing our clients some unusual suggestions to say, you know what, have some faith. We did.
No, I mean, being obviously in the US, it's definitely memorable. And for me, like, I'm not going to forget Bob's Your Uncle, So I'd love to hear the rebrand journey. Like, what's that look like? What's the process look like?
The process is really, it's values driven. So we spent a lot of time defining our culture and the set of values we wanted to live by, and how we wanted to be, experienced by the outside world. So we talked, we spent a lot of time talking to our staff. We chatted with our clients about, their opinions, many similar things, probably not quite as formally as we would do on a client branding project, but the same process. So, a lot of internal soul searching about who we've been and who we want to be, based around, the people that we have, because we had a great crew. We weren't looking at changing who we were. We were really just looking to better reflect that. So to solidify that, we didn't expose the name to any of our clients before we launched it, because it was interesting, because we actually didn't want the answer. We've always said to our clients that, a name ultimately is more about what you put behind it than what people might think the first time they see it or experience it. I think in our case, we got both, because we already knew what was behind it. But the process, yeah, hundreds of names, I think, literally our own internal creative crew. We had a few outsiders contributing, people that, that freelance creative people that we've worked with before. And we really went through a hardcore distillation process. Because, you can imagine, in the agency world, there are no names that are off the table, right? We have the latitude to be as outrageous and as silly and as weird as we want. It's not like we're a business software, right? But at the same time, we have serious clients that, are going to want to do business with an entity that they're not ashamed to talk about. So it was a interesting process. I would say most of our branding projects have tighter guidelines, in terms of what the brand was meant to be. But at the end, we wanted to be likable. I would say that was a big ask in our name, because that's how our clients feel about us. Like we're generally, we're Canadians, right? Hard not to like. It's our national personality, pretty much. But we had the opportunity to take advantage of that.
So you chat, Bob, you chat with staff, you chat with clients, and you probably come up with a lot of ideas. How do you start the brainstorming process of names from after kind of the research phase?
Oh man, there are there's a couple constructs for how you do naming, and I'll say it's usually the most challenging part of any branding assignment when we do branding assignments. And I actually tell clients up front, I said, you may not enjoy the naming process part of this, and you may not like the first things that you see, but you may fall in love with them ultimately. And it was the same with us. There were names that were very sort of bullish on what we do, brash, bold, names that had the word creative in them, somehow that tried to define us. There were names, that were based on the founder, me, Bob, of which this is not one, by the way. Interestingly, and that was one of my points of resistance to it. I didn't want an agency named after me, even though it's called Bob's Your Uncle. It was meant to be not that. Of course, I do now get to be the uncle, and it's a point of connection and friendliness between us and our clients in the outside world. I have a lot of clients and folks that we work with that just call me uncle now, which is it's an amusing outcome. And then we had a couple B2B clients, quite serious ones, Fortune 500 companies, and we're like, man, we got to try something also that is okay for them, more on the conservative side. And then you have ones that just have feel. So we tried to bucket them into categories, and the structure of those categories is a bit fanciful. It's not a hard science. There are naming companies that have a rigid process, and specifically we'll do these ones, and these ones. Like ultimately, you're also massively constrained by what's available, right? I mean, I know it sounds trite, but you can't find a URL for any name that, it is common English. Like, good luck. And then also trademark registration and all of that. So that was part of it. We found there were no other, and you can imagine in the agency world that there's not a shortage of agencies with clever names. So you come up with a name, they could be a dozen others very similar. Bob's Your Uncle was clean. There was, a small agency in Australia. There was a little gift card retail shop in Boston, who, by the way, owned the URL, which I only acquired a year ago. So almost 10 years, I sent them an email every year saying, hey, how about that URL?
What made them finally sell?
A couple things. So their business, going through the pandemic, they were a retail store. They had a few pivots about what they were doing. And so they went to a more online offering. They weren't really using that URL in the same way. And he just said, it sounds like a pain in the ass to part with it, because you got to go through this whole process and we have to, reestablish everything. I said, we'll help you with all that. We'll pay you fairly. It was actually more than what I thought was reasonable at the time, but they paid a lot for it 20 years ago, and that's how long they'd had it. So respectfully, I had to pony up a little bit more than I wanted. And it was totally worth it.
What was another front runner?
Oh, man, you know what? Honestly, I can't remember.
You don't remember? Okay. You put all of them behind you.
I would literally have to go back. I got rid of those out of my head as soon as I possibly could.
Let's talk about the takeover of the Olympics. What
Okay.
happened there?
So what happened there is we had a client, a longstanding client, Canon, and that was still in the day when point and shoot cameras, digital cameras were sort of in their heyday, and still their SLR, their big format cameras, they were number 2 in the market. So we were working hard on building that business and that brand. And Panasonic was the Olympic sponsor, the official camera sponsor of the Olympics. This is the Vancouver Winter Olympics, and and Canon also had about 500 of their own pro photographers there. But the rules in the Olympics, driven in part by previous guerrilla marketing, sabotage marketing efforts, they hired, actually, it was a friend of mine who runs a big media agency. They contracted her to write the rules so that no clever ad guy could come in and do something disruptive like we did. And so we tore apart the rule. We were looking for every loophole. We tried, could we write a logo in sand on a barge below the bridge? Could we, drape a building? Could we do anything, write names on there was nothing. They had literally written every landlord we talked to, every ship owner, anybody we talked to, like, no, I can't touch that. We've been warned. So they terrified the entire town into like, thou shalt not post a brand name. But then we discovered through a friend of mine, Paul Pelton, who runs a mobile media company, a little loophole that said, if you have a private livery service, like a taxi company or a courier service that requires vehicles, you can have the name of your livery service on your vehicle. So we thought, great, let's register the Canon shuttle company. We have 500 pro photographers at the Olympics. This company can exist to shuttle these photographers around. Legitimate. We'll create, bus stop or pickup stops for them. We brief all the drivers. So Canon agreed, and it was shocking. And the reason the Olympics were so important for them, other than the fact that that Panasonic, was sponsoring, was their CEO from Tokyo was coming to the Olympics, and they were facing a Olympics bereft of their brand name, whilst their global CEO attended, and that was not something they wanted to face. So that drove a bit of additional energy, but it probably took us, 3-4 months working through legal, working through what you see here, which is leasing 50 Canon minis. If
you're listening to the audio, there is the video up here, and you can see actually what they did. But keep going.
Yeah, and then we had these oversized, styrene camera molds built and put on top of the cameras, and then we ran them in fleets of 5, so 10 fleets of 5, driving all throughout Vancouver during the Olympics, and it was a spectacle. You still talk to people that remember seeing them there. And after about 2 days, Canon was summoned by the Olympic Committee and threatened that they would have all of their photographers removed unless they banned the cars. And Canon's team, with the legal work that we'd done, showed them, what we'd done, and they were like, "Oh shit! Please, would you mind reducing your convoys to cars of 3 instead of 5?" And we're like, "Absolutely."
That's really amazing. And it took a lot of work on the back end to do all this. It wasn't just thrown together.
It was an insane amount of work. You imagine just the agreement to lease a car like this for, a period of 2 weeks to get all those cameras constructed. We had to hire 60 drivers, all briefed, on the protocol and what we were doing. We had to keep it secret. So these were all stashed in a warehouse in North Vancouver. Didn't see the light of day until launch day. Yeah.
Getting a client like Canon is not necessarily an easy feat. When you first started the agency, Bob, talk about the first milestone client-wise for you.
Yeah, a couple. There were sort of 2 really. We had a couple fashion clients that we'd taken from, our former employee that came along with us, Calvin Klein and Kenneth Cole, that we launched in Canada. So we sort of had a bit of a fashion beginning, and in part because of that work, there was still 3 of us. We won a competitive review for a company called Tip Top Tailors, and it was a 50 agency review. They had 50 agents from across North America, and they sent us this big RFP. And the classic thing, right? Org chart, how many people staffing in each department. I'm like, I called the client who I did not know, but I had been referred to him. I said, it was John Dawkins. I said, John, Bill Ratcliffe thinks, you and I would work well together, and we have the background for this, but I can't answer your RFP. Like, we'd fail on paragraph 1. And it's like, okay, just come. So they sent us the brief, and we pitched our heart outs, and we got it. So that was a big client. It allowed us to go from like 3 people to 20 almost overnight, and we did the repositioning, rebranding for them, and then all of their retail advertising for a couple of years. And then one of our art directors came into the office one day with a bottle of Mike's Hard Lemonade. Said, "This is some crazy stuff. 7% alcohol, pre-mixed with lemonade. Never seen it before." We did a bit of investigation. We saw it was like, seemed to have some energy behind it, but nobody really knew about it. So we found the owner, Anthony Von Mandel, ran a company called Mission Hill out of Vancouver. And Mike's was just like a startup thing for him. He was a wine guy. He ended up building Mission Hill Winery, of the top 10 winery in the world. Like, it's an amazing place. But he built that on the backs of Mike's Hard Lemonade. Because when we started talking to him, it was like, it's a small brand. I'm not investing much behind it yet, but I'm the first in North America to have a product like this. And all the big companies, Molson Coors, Labatt, everybody was coming after the category. We knew that they were all going to launch. And Anthony with Mike's was there ahead of time. So we put together a SWAT team, and our mission was get out first, get out strongest. And we launched that thing in about 2 months of work. And that was the real game changer for our agency, because that was taking a product that was all about branding, and doing something brave with it, and launching, in every way possible, with a very surprising idea, given that this was a product with a functional difference, right? It's a first pre-mixed vodka with lemonade. It didn't exist. So we could have simply talked about the product advantages and probably done really well, but only for a short period of time, right? We knew that every other brand was going to come in with the same product advantage. So we went for the emotional punch. And it was actually in research groups, and we were specifically looking for, how do we make this beverage more appealing to male drinkers? Because the early adopters were almost all female, and we needed to broaden it. And so we came up with this idea. The original Mike, the original packaging had his whole sort of life story written around the package, in very unique copy and very unique font. It was all about the story of a aspiring young entrepreneur who used to sell lemonade to his kids at a lemonade stand, and then grew up, and now he's doing this. And we're like, nobody cares about that. So what if he was just an asshole who killed lemons and hated them and did everything to make their lives miserable? And I had a very brave client named Russell Barnett, who's done many, many amazing things in his career since. And he said, okay, but you have to present the creative to the owner. And the owner is a very, suave, sophisticated wine aficionado. And I'm like, okay. So we did. Russell was in San Francisco. Anthony was in Vancouver. We presented over the phone. And, I could just see Anthony going dead silent. It was like, what the hell are these guys talking about? What are they doing to my brand? But we showed him, what we learned in research. We showed him a clip when we showed one of the research groups a simple board that talked about, lemons hurt real bad in the making of this product. And she looked at it and said, what did they ever do to him? It literally affected them emotionally. It's like, this is ridiculous. It's ridiculously wonderful. So we're like going hard on this idea. And then everything, as you can see, everything went behind that. This was a voice, a brand that had the voice of one, right? The voice of Mike, who existed only to bring destruction to lemons.
What did he say when you presented it to him, that you were worried about his reaction?
He didn't say anything. He said, thank you very much. And then he continued the conversation with his brand manager, Russell, who then called me afterwards and said, whoa, what do we got ourselves into? He said, but I've convinced him we've got a green light, we can go. So then that was it.
It's amazing. You also did some work with Popeyes.
Yeah. So Popeyes has been a client in Canada for 16 years. We started with it. They had only, I mean, obviously in America, you're like, what? Popeyes? Of course, everybody knows about Popeyes. Well, they didn't in Canada. There were only 20 restaurants and 20 separate franchisees. They were run without very much sort of franchisor oversight. Canada wasn't, a market of note for them. And then they decided it should be, right? So we were hired to take the brand mainstream. Interestingly, in Toronto, it was a very niche community. All the franchisees were Muslim. Most of the stores serviced their community. It was halal. It was by no means a mainstream brand, and almost nobody knew about it. And then they started to invest in the expansion, and we combined their marketing budget. So we've taken on, we've been with them on the entire journey from the very first foray of bringing the brand budgets together to growing it within the city, then within the province, then across the country, and doing a lot of really, really amazing things. It's a brand with, a ton of soul, a strong identity, and a great, great product. So in Canada, we're going to be almost 400 stores soon from 20. And really, given the competition, something to think about.
Talk about hiring and staffing, especially with, when you get these big contracts, staffing up and then maintaining it's from the conversations, the agency world, it could be a very kind of challenging landscape sometimes.
Yeah, we're fortunate, blessed even that, our employee turnover is like above 12 years. So we have a very, very significant, steady senior team, right? That's been and done that no matter what that is. So we have that at our core, which I think is enormously powerful. And then over time, we've actually reduced our staff count to focus more on our core purpose, right? Which is creative and strategy. And we've started to outsource things that require scale, execution, digital programming, media. We used to do media planning and buying in-house. Now we fully have partners for that, or we work with our clients' partners. So as we grew up and became clear about what we wanted to do, some of that actually got easier. I can't imagine running an agency, a mid-sized small agency now that does everything. It just seems like that would be impossible. Like, media is so sophisticated now. We simply can't. We don't think it makes sense for us to compete there. So that's been a big help. The digital enablement also, has made us, we've been around long enough. We know how long things used to take and how long things take now. It's like that level of compression and the productivity of people. So I'm actually really hopeful on that score with things like AI and stuff and other tools. Like, we are just getting so efficient in how we do things. And then the people part specifically, hiring, Toronto's a really good market. It's the challenge now is that it's a very expensive market for people, like Chicago and New York and Los Angeles. There's no shortage of expensive markets for living and for people now. But yeah, I would say we haven't had a problem finding people. We haven't had a problem keeping people. The increasing challenge is getting them up to speed quickly enough, right? Because there's so many moving parts now, and nobody has time to get really well grounded in a piece of business before they're in a piece of business. So we've really adjusted. We've really focused hard on our onboarding new employees. We have a fantastic director of client service who I think is, the most phenomenal person in the world for the way she welcomes people, trains people, introduces them to the client and the work, but spends a lot of time with them. Like, a lot of time. It's a big part of her role is to bring in those people and make sure that they succeed.
Is there something for other companies, it could be agencies or any other companies, something you do in the onboarding process that others should think about as well, but maybe aren't?
We I mean, I can't really speak to what other agencies do. That's but we do take time. We spend time taking them through our values and what they mean. And I would also say, as a company, we have a Monday and Friday meeting. So we meet first thing every Monday morning, and we share 3 intentions for the week personally, right? Like, what are the 3? I'm not talking about a docket list or a project list. Not like I'm working on this, but sort of 3 big things they want to accomplish that week. And then at the end of the week, we get together again Friday afternoon with everybody, and everybody sort of gives people an update about how they did. It's not like a rigid, like you said, these 3 things, now you report. It's more casual than that. It's more conversational. And everybody has to share one of our values that they lived, and they have to shout out a teammate for one of the values that they lived. So it really, in terms of how that relates to an onboarding process, it really helps new people sort of become part of the culture, and they sort of hear what everybody's up to. So they really quickly get a broad sense of not only feeling included, but sort of involved in everything. So I just find that that's helpful. I think we've all been there where you're going in a new position. It's just, you're in your zone, but there's so much that takes so much time to figure out about who is everybody else and what is everybody else doing. And that kind of socialization is, I think, enormously helpful.
Yeah, I love that, because it's almost like they're indoctrinated twice a week in the values, and they're hearing how, like you said, one values they lived, and then shouting out to values that someone else lives. I love that.
Yeah,
thanks for
maybe it's because I grew up in a church.
Yeah, we'll get to that because I want to hear about your background. But I want to go back to the niche service thing, and your thought on, did that require discipline? Was there a point where, because someone's asking you to do work, they trust you, and you hear, at least I've talked to clients that have gone off and they've really niched their service, which has made it easier for them to take on clients, hire, all those things. And then there's others that are gone the full service route, and they'll do everything and take everything. So was that a hard decision at the time? Because the client's like, hey, we want to give you this ongoing advertising campaign, Bob, and you can't. I don't know. I feel you have to be somewhat disciplined to just say no to some of these projects over time. It probably gets easier and easier, but in the beginning, talk about in the beginning of saying no to these things.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a common saying, what you say no to is more important than what you say yes to. But man, as an entrepreneur, that's the most, saying no to work. It's like, it just goes against your grain, right? It's like, and I'm pretty infamous for saying, like, I think we can do this. And I'll talk to my partner, and she'll Cora will be like, no, we can't. Or no, we shouldn't. And I'll be like, really?
She's the voice of reason, is what you're saying.
She is absolutely the voice of reason, and holds our feet to the fire on some of those tougher decisions. But yeah, I think niching our service down, it's still an ongoing discussion and movement, right? So we do sort of pure branding work, which is tends to be episodic. They're projects, but the majority of our work is ongoing. As a creative agency to ongoing clients. But what that means these days, like, you tell me what it means. We do the foundational, platform creative that could roll out into TV that we produce, or, outdoor, digital, all those other things. And then there's, the entire social media realm that we mostly manage for our clients. Even to the extent of doing their community management, which, that's our current, like, should we really be doing community management, or does that really belong more with a client team? Versus creating the organic and paid content that that's definitely in our wheelhouse. But the how niche can you go? As you can become a one thing for social media if you want. But our sweet spot, and I think our biggest value is still when we can bring all of those things together, because that's the ongoing conversation with the brand and their audience, right? Social media digital, all those things, it just happens more in real time. So we can't really, in our mind, we can't really walk back from that and say, well, we don't want to do that part. We just want to do like the big, interesting creative projects, because increasingly, something down at the other end might have far more impact. And increasingly does. We see examples of it every day from brands where, they've blown up on something. Ideally, something useful and helpful and sort of in line with what they'd like to be known for. So yeah, we look for those moments.
So Bob, it seems like then you would have a lot of partners that you work with. And do you find that those partners, it produces more business? Maybe you refer to them to projects and vice versa. They'll bring you in because they're specializing in just one thing on TV or ads or something like that.
I'd say today I feel more like a sugar daddy.
You do, yeah. So you'll bring a bunch of partners in.
I don't mean it that way, but
I know what you mean.
It's been I would be honest, disappointingly at some level, the business that we've shared, and versus what what's come back to us through those channels. And I used to have an expectation that there would be some quid pro quo, but honestly, I've let that go, because it's not the reason why we're working with them. We're working with them because they're trusted partners in what we need to accomplish for our clients. That's it. They do that job well. I'm thrilled. Should something come our way, of course, that'd be interesting. But they're not also speaking to clients in the same way. I would argue that I'm not even sure I want the conversations to be sourced from there. They have, for the most part, those kinds of agencies have more episodic relationships with their clients, right? Those are if they're a web developer, if they're a content producer, if they're, a lot of those are broadcast production company. A lot of those they fight for every project, right? They've got their own mouths to feed, getting their next project, right? I feel fortunate that, a large part of our business, we build over time. We have clients that stay with us, and there's, we focus on the relationship, and we have less of a need to go out and, trust me, we're motivated to get new business and we work hard at it, but it's not our ongoing existence.
Yeah. After doing it for a couple of decades, you have a reputation, you get a lot of income, and you have a lot of clients. And so you'll bring on different, teams to help with the components. So I'm sure you have a really nice networked partner program, and hopefully they appreciate you bringing them onto projects.
Oh yeah, I've no doubt they do. Yeah, and we have like great relationships with them. I said the other comments half in jest, because that's it's sort of natural. You give business to somebody, you sort of expect something back, and I was like, no, that's not why I'm doing it. That's not why we're doing it. We're doing it to do great stuff.
I'd love to hear about your background a little bit, and what was it like growing up rural Manitoba, Mennonite, that brought you to, at that point, were you thinking you want to do something in business?
No. No. I mean, early days, I don't know what I would have thought. That it wasn't it wasn't much of a thought. Even going into university, I went to business school, but I still wasn't really sure about the idea of going into business. I didn't, I was always envious of the people that were like, I gotta be a doctor, I gotta be a lawyer, I gotta be an engineer, I gotta be an ad guy. Although that was never a conversation I heard. But yeah, it was sort of, when I graduated from business school, I got a job with a private sector government joint venture that was helping to introduce technology to small businesses. And so I was a consultant. They hired 9 BCom grads, and it was sort of like, it was an amazing experience, because I'm still working with sort of university peers, but we're thrown out into the world as like proper consultants, charging a fee, and having to sort of also like do a bit of business development, but then managing these consulting projects. And I thought it was interesting. And I thought, for sure, my boss at the time was a friend who was a year ahead of me. He knew what he was doing. He was going to be a business consultant. And I thought, yeah, that's, sounds reasonable. He ended up becoming a senior partner at KPMG and doing extraordinarily well. I was going through, those kinds of interviews, And then I sort of added for a advertising agency position. I was like, I don't even know what that's about, but I'm gonna go. So I went for the interview, and I was like, what is this place? You can imagine, right? An advertising agency with, all the classic brick and beam, gorgeous office, smart people, but not wearing suits. So that was a big thing, right? I was like, I thought I was in for a life with a dark blue suit. Um, and it was not the case. I thought seems like the ideal combination of professional and creative. And so I was like, I want this job. I didn't know about I want this life at that point, but like, I want this job. And I got it. And yeah.
Was college common where you came from? People
No,
going?
no. Within that, we moved out of that community when I was, an adolescent, but where I, initially grew up, yeah, no, not only was college not common, finishing high school was not common. In fact, at some point it was banned, and they set up their own schools to educate to a grade 9 level by people who probably never got that far.
So what would people go on to do? Did they just own farms there, or?
Farms, small businesses. They were actually a very entrepreneurial community, like quite a successful community, but not necessarily in the way that you might think. My grandfather owned a feed and hatchery business. Like, it was quite a large business. He was ultimately a fantastic entrepreneur.
Who are some of your mentors? It could be actually personal mentors or colleagues or even distant mentors, like you learned from books, that have helped your business career.
Yeah, I think especially because I was fortunate in the business of doing some really like cool things very young. And one of them was the tobacco cessation strategy for Health Canada. So we were working with the government on a very robust, deep strategic effort. And there was a guy there named Jim Mintz who was running the social media program, social marketing, sorry. And by social marketing, that meant behavioral change, not social media. And so we would talk three times a week. He had a course that he taught at the university, and he had an hour between the end of his workday and the start of his course, which coincided with my dinner hour. But I was always happy to take his call, and he would call and we would chat for an hour, 3 times a week. And it was amazing. And so he was a client, but also, an extraordinary mentor. And then the second one was also a client. Mark Yateman was the head of Mr. Lube when it was owned by Imperial Oil. And a client that we had for a long time that we helped grow that business for quite a while. So yeah. So mentors have sort of been, people I'm actively working with, often, ideally in a position where I should be perhaps mentoring them, but because they were, at a certain point in their careers, and they were happy to take the time.
Do you remember a lesson from either of them that sticks, either with Jim or Mark?
Oh man, honestly, those are quite long ago, so I can't even pinpoint something. But mostly they some of the ones that sort of seem most memorable were very, very basic, right? And it was like, just be fully yourself. Like, don't feel you have to over explain or anticipate how we're going to react, or I'll tell you another one I do remember. Kurt Kane. So Kurt Kane was our client at Molson Coors at Denver. He went on to become, I think, the CEO of Wendy's Corporation, and had a huge marketing career before that. And he was ex-US military too, so he had he didn't have a problem expressing his point of view. And I think when we came to present creative to his team a couple of times, he called me back one day and said, "Bob, if you have something to present, just present it. Just say it. Like, you don't need to sugarcoat anything with us. And if we say something you think is shit, tell us it's shit." Like, he said, don't be so Canadian."
Right.
That was the lesson.
Lesson, don't be so Canadian, right?
Don't be so Canadian.
Bob, I just want to be the first one to thank you. Thanks for sharing your journey, your lessons. I want to encourage people to check out bobsyouruncle.com to learn more. It took him 10 years to get that domain, so check it out. And Bob, I just thanks, and we'll see everyone next time.
Hey,
Thanks, Bob.
pleasure, Jeremy. Appreciate the time. Thank you.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I'm feeling like 100 grand.